Welcome to Leadership Reimagined. I'm your host, Cassie Crosby. Today, I'm joined by Kwame Boateng, retired Army officer and strategist at MITRE. He's been designing strategy at the highest levels for much of his career. Today, we're talking about strategy, how it forms, how it evolves, and how it shows up in leadership over time. Hi, Kwame. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Of course. So, you and I have known each other for, I guess, a little over 10 years now.
Decades,
Decades.
decades.
Yeah. And it's incredible to see you in a suit, to see how far you've come since we were in, I guess, an Army school together last in 2015. So can you
Yes.
share a little bit about your career path, where you came from, and how you got where you are today?
Oh, yeah, sure. And it's good to see you, not in a dusty uniform in a cold library.
Yeah.
So I came out of West Point, and it's an engineering school at its core. So joined the engineer corps. And one of the things that appealed to me, I'll never forget, they were like, hey, the engineers, you can start out doing all the sort of commando things and blowing things up, but eventually your back is going to get old, and then you can switch out and start building things. So that's why I joined the engineer corps. And I think a changing or a pivotal point in the career was when I met you at SAMS, School for Advanced Military Studies. So point of that school within the Army, at least, is to produce strategists, forward-thinking young officers that work at the operational level. And it was probably one of the best schools I went to in the Army.
Yeah.
It really was like a true graduate school experience where you really think about how you think, metacognition, if to use the terms that we had at that time. So I think coming out of SAMS, you really realize the power of a strategy and how it doesn't necessarily grab the headlines because there's lagging effects. But when it's done right, it can really position an organization to exploit advantage. And that sort of became like the way I thought about things moving forward and bred some success for subsequent assignments within the Army.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
curious how, you kind of talk about SAMS being that first step into strategy, really that general understanding of it. And then how did that evolve over time as you really got your feet wet, got out there doing the work, right? Working for like four-star commanders and others. How did that evolve?
Yeah, I think what you realize is maybe two things for me. The idea of strategy is sometimes more appealing than the actual strategy itself. So I don't think you can find any large scale organization that doesn't say it's creating a strategy. Right now, in the work I'm doing, you see a lot of companies saying that they have an AI strategy, which to me is kind of ridiculous. It's like, do you have a Microsoft Excel strategy? No, you just have a strategy, and then there's different tools that support it. You have a plan, you have some sort of a vision for how things should look in the future, and then reality, attacks that plan relentlessly. A good strategy sort of anticipates those attacks. You can't anticipate everything, but it's flexible enough to accommodate changes. And that's, I think, what I saw was the difference between a sort of good strategy and a bad strategy. Also, you got to have a leader or leadership that is able to sort of champion that strategy, because without that, inertia is going to take hold. The culture of an organization takes hold, and that's just how things will continue to get done because that's what people are familiar with.
Yeah, one of the smartest things that I remember from SAMS that I think about often is planning for not just, if something goes wrong or gets in your way, but planning for catastrophic success.
Yeah,
That
that's
just
a great. I
changed my
remember that
whole
one.
mindset.
Catastrophic success.
Yeah.
That was a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be seeing that play out right now, right? Where it's like, hey, things went way better than we expected. Now what do we do? We sort of planned for this big fight, on the military side, but it's over. The thing we wanted to have happen happened, but we didn't have all the other subsequent efforts positioned to kind of exploit this window of opportunity. You know, hopefully you can scramble that up enough and take advantage, but it's always good if you had plans and anticipated catastrophic success.
Yeah. And it's such military language to say, exploit that target of opportunity. But really, I think
Yeah.
that's, we had such an action-oriented framework. And sometimes I think that the learning that the military put us through, the training and the education, some of that is, I find, sometimes lacking in corporate America. And people are really
Hmm.
left to kind of figure it out. And so what do you mean when you say that, like exploit that target of opportunity, right, after catastrophic success?
So I think the idea of like someone being a trained strategist is pretty rare. If for no other reason, for at
Yeah.
least from what I've seen, think about when we went to Sam's. That's a year where we're still getting paid our regular salary, and they're like, "Hey, just read books and learn as much as you can." Where is that model replicated anywhere? Where can any company afford to do that with their middle management, junior level leadership cadre? Say,
Right.
hey, just a third of you take a year off and read and get as good as you can. That's a unique thing we have. So then you learn on the job. And on the job, we measure success usually not in years, but like quarters or
Mm.
maybe a year if you have some sort of long-term project. So
Yeah.
it's hard to think through, a plan that's going to take maybe more than a year or have multiple. You don't even have a timeline associated with it. You just have maybe conditions. Hey, once we see these conditions, then we will do this. And here are the indicators that suggest those conditions have been achieved. So I think that's the first step to recognizing, hey, we're approaching the conditions that equal success. If you take that to commercial, sometimes that could be like market cap or something like that, or maybe some sort of user penetration. But you need something that says, I think we're doing well, because I also think, we tend to be very pessimistic, right? Or good planners are pessimistic planners. And sometimes it can be hard to be like, no, actually things are going better than we expected. We should do the next thing we said we're going to do, whether that's, the next phase of a project, a new delivery, develop a new feature, or launch a new product, or, transition in the military speak to the next phase of whatever our operation was going to be.
Yeah, I think measuring success is always part of the hardest part of it, and I think most
Yeah.
overlooked. And that was the same where we came from, and I see it all the time in corporate America too. You
Even
know,
that book, Defining Victory, there was this book we read called like, you know, at the outset of any, in this example, it's war, but any sort of major operation, if you don't define victory, then what are you doing? You just invite all this scope creep, mission creep.
mhm.
What are the terms of success? Because I think also in SAMS, we had instructors who were like, sort of the mantra at the time was, hey, we lost in Afghanistan. I remember someone being like, who said we lost? It was like, we're in their capital, and the person who knocked down our towers is in the bottom of the ocean. Sounds like a win to me. But I think we never clearly defined it that way, maybe because we thought that outcome was so unlikely. So we had other metrics that were less achievable in the long run, like democratizing this whole nation forever.
Well, and the truth has a date timestamp, right? What was success 10 years ago, you could look at today and maybe you have a different way of looking at it.
That's true.
Yeah, but I actually really, that part of that defining success, it's something I work with every day. I mean, it's a huge part of coaching, right? That's the first thing you do with someone is really like, what does success look like for you, right? What's that
Hmm.
future state that you're trying to achieve? It's such a critical part of any plan or coaching engagement. So, I'm curious about like when someone says someone is strategic, right? What are we really talking about? What does that actually mean?
I think sometimes it just means someone is smart. Hey, that's a strategic thinker. They're
Sure.
smart. To me, though, if someone says like, "Hey, that person is strategic," like it evokes some of the stuff we just mentioned, which is they know how to take advantage of opportunities or shield their organization from distress when those times come. Ideally, they anticipated there was distress. So 2025 with the new administration, new priorities, it could be very distressful depending on what industry you were. But some smart, strategic organizations said, hey, this administration is going to do things in a much different way than what we've been used to. Let's position ourselves to take advantage of it. And you can kind of see, just look at your stock market ticker. There's some people who've reaped the rewards by positioning themselves correctly and others that haven't. But anyone who's strategic, in my view, has to have some sort of future focused idea. They got to plan beyond just like what's right in front of them, which usually requires, a couple things. One is you got to have great assessment of the environment you operate within, because you got to kind of anticipate how changes in that environment will affect you.
Mm.
The term that we use in the military, right, is situational awareness. I don't know if that translates the same way in corporate lingo, but I do feel like you need to have this sort of environmental awareness uh,
Mhm.
to be able to think strategically and understand how there's interconnected effects among different actors within your environment. So if that's another company and company X takes this action, you should understand how that affects you. So that requires you to think outside your organization to some degree, to have that sort of market intelligence, I think might be the term that we use on the business side, so that you can anticipate. I think that's, if there's one like verb that goes along with strategic thinking, it's anticipate.
Yeah.
Nothing There's going to be surprises, of course, but a strategic thinker anticipated to some degree, hey, I think the environment will change in some way. So let's start preparing ourselves for this environmental change.
Yeah, that's absolutely like anticipate so that you have the ability to shift, right? Or maybe you're even ahead of the curve in some cases, which I know that's right. A lot of people with AI are trying to get ahead of something that nobody actually understands.
Well, AI is interesting, right? Because things are changing so rapidly. And I do a little bit of work in the space now. And it's like what I'm seeing on the government side is, hey, we really need to catch up with AI. And they are. They're like, injecting AI into
Sure.
people's workflows. Everyone's using chatbots to check their email. But to your point about understanding how these changes might affect your environment, it's like, okay, we got this new chat LLM for pick your government agency. And it's
Mhm.
like, man, everybody's using it, which is the behavior we wanted. But we didn't think through, man, that's like tripling our compute costs because everyone's using this LLM. Hell, we don't have a contract in place to buy servers from Dell or GPUs from NVIDIA. Now what?
Yep.
So someone strategic might be like, hey, this change in our environment is going to increase, change this infrastructure design that we have. So let's start, let's marry these two concepts up. We got more AI, we're going to need the corresponding infrastructure to support this AI. And the next
Mhm.
thing is going to be agentic AI, which is going to be more infrastructure that's required to support that. And then maybe, if they're really sad, it's like, do we really want to roll this out to everybody? The person working at the gym, do they need to have a chatbot, whatever? Like maybe we start with
Right.
this cadre of users first because we only have so much budget. Part of strategy is deciding what to do with your finite resources that you have. So, where do we apply those to have the most impact during this
Yeah.
phase? And then we expand over some period of time. And even before AI, just the proliferation of sensors. I just
Mhm.
remember walking around and I had a battery pack underneath my plates because I had so many little radios and goggles and blah blah blah. Just walking around,
Yeah.
you're like a walking machine. So yeah, to your point, it's like I remember at one point it was like, hey, energy is really our pacing item.
Yeah.
It's like we have to, if we without the operational energy, battery storage to support our drones, and now think about drone
Yeah.
proliferation. Do we have the battery depth to support all these low cost drones that we want to employ? Hopefully, someone's thinking about that.
What do you think people often get wrong about strategy?
So I think a little bit of it is like, trying to throw strategy at the problem du jour and thinking that'll solve your problems, right?
Mhm.
So right now in government, you've seen a lot of acquisition reform. So people are like, hey, we need an acquisition strategy. And if it's stood alone and not integrated with the other things or not tied to other environmental changes, that's not going to do you much good. I think the other thing, like I said, is sometimes the busyness of making a strategy can be like a replacement for the thinking through the environmental factors. I'm thinking here of like, Napoleon just spending hours looking at a map to understand the environment so that as new opportunities become visible, he's in a position to take advantage of those. So if you're starting to build a strategy and you don't start with like, let's understand this environment, like who
Yeah.
else is operating within this environment? What are the challenges? Who are the movers? Then it's going to be really hard for your strategy to be effective over a long period of time. You might get like a nice strategy in a book and a slide, and then the minute something changes, it's like, man, our strategy is obsolete now.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think that's super relevant. The situational understanding is like, what is your market, right? What are your competitors
Mhm.
doing? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Like, right, that whole like SWOT, right? That's
Yeah,
really part
yeah.
of like that situational understanding. That's basically what a SWOT analysis is.
You can't go wrong with some of those steps, right? Um, you know, uh, we were talking about AI and like it's very interesting right now because it's so new. So there's all these changes, and it's interesting to me just being on the sidelines a bit,
Yeah.
but watching like, who would have thought of that? Like, who would have thought that, we have this transformative chatbot and the business model side of it is subscription based. I'm sure that's not how Microsoft thought they'd be making money off of ChatGPT was getting a lot of consumers to sign up for individual subscriptions.
Sure.
But they were in a position to do that. And then because of their other environmental connections, now they can integrate it across their enterprise. Google has all this vertical integration so they can roll it out across their suite. And I don't think anyone, definitely not me, predicted like, hey, Claude is really going to lead. They're going to be on top of the leaderboard because they're not going to go the LLM route. They're going to focus on
Yeah.
coding.
Mm.
Which brings up a good point, right? Which is, you know, does your strategy need to be divorced from your values? There's some people like, hey, strategies just need to be cold, realistic, practical, and then, let the values fall where they may. And others are like, yeah, if your values aren't aligned with your strategy, how are you going to sustain it? You're going to have
Yeah.
you're not going to execute it well.
Yeah, I think I'm in that second camp of like there has to be real alignment between values and
Yeah,
strategy. I mean, that's the foundation of your strategy, really, and keeping people focused on what matters most.
I think it's hard because there's been moments in history, if you talk about like national strategies or grand strategy, where it's like, hey, you're supposed to be this federation democratic leader. Why are you saying I have to do this thing? And it's like, because I'm at war. And if you don't do this thing, I'm gonna lose. So this is the $1 million dialogue, right? It's gonna be hard to sustain your organization, your workforce, yourself, if your strategy is devoid of any sort of values. And honestly, when you design a strategy, your values are going to inform, even if it's silently, what you think is possible or not possible, what's
Yeah.
feasible, not feasible. So to your point about a good strategy might make those assumptions. And then maybe there's some conditions where you revisit those values. So you don't find yourself slipping, and you can at least be intentional about, hey, for this phase, we recognize that things are going to be rough.
I think in the work I do now, when I think about it, setting that end state or that future state that you want, like that's very much a values-based future state. I help people with their like leadership legacy and vision. And it's all rooted in your values, right? It's like, what is the world that you envision? What is it that in your hopes and dreams, what is the world that you would want to exist? Right. And that's all
Yeah,
based on our values and what we think matters and all of that.
that's perfect, right? Like your vision of the future, hopefully, is not like devoid of the values that
Yeah.
inform your present. Why would it be? Why would you want a future that is absent the things that are important to you?
Yeah, I think it can go sideways pretty quick and like any national strategy especially, right? Like if we're if democratic values are what we say we believe in and that's what our country is built upon, any national strategy should be founded in our democratic values. Maybe that's a little
Yeah,
pedantic.
I mean, recent history, we won't touch current events that are still playing out, right?
Well,
But recent history, right, is like when we don't do those things because we think that there's a grand strategy, a perspective, not the perspective, but a version of Vietnam was, hey, we ourselves were once a colony. Ho Chi Minh famously said, hey, I'm modeling my approach after George Washington and what he did against the British. And it became a very unpopular war for not just that reason, but a number of reasons. But from the outset, it was a very hard war to justify
yeah,
because it wasn't aligned with sort of our founding values. And,
right.
history is replete with examples like that where we think, leadership at the national level thinks, hey, we have to make this sort of value sacrifice in order to protect this grand strategic initiative. And maybe that's not the right call.
Yeah. I just reread Washington's Crossing in the last couple
Oh,
months.
look at you.
It was interesting. There's definitely some very boring parts, but I love the strategy part and the reasons why we did certain things. And more importantly, it's a real lesson in how willpower and the will of the people can really determine the outcome of things. And I think that, the Revolutionary War was a very good example of that. Just the will of the people really, determining the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our Revolutionary War from the British perspective, that's a great example of like, divorcing your values from your strategy because the big moral injury there was like, hey, why are we in America getting treated not like Englishmen?
Yeah.
Before there was America, it was like George Washington famously was like, I'm Englishman. I fought in this war. I should have this English rank. And they're like, no, but you're a colonist.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just an American, something different.
And look at us today.
Look at us today.
So, in terms of, being more strategic, thinking more strategically, what is your advice to
Mhm.
people who have been told, like, you need to be more strategic. We want to see your bigger thinking. How do people get there?
That's a great question because I'm assuming in this example, you don't have a year to dedicate yourself to reading books and strategic theory. So I would say like a practical guide to thinking strategically is probably a good model that we learned for futures, which is like you said, reverse engineer it. and
Mm-hmm.
start with modeling the environment or world or version of your company that you want to achieve, right? And then after you take a bunch of time to model that, if you're really good, then you can say, what ecosystem are we existing in? What kind of partnerships do we have, public, private? And then from there, you say, all right, now where are we today? And then that sort of mental practice will make some of the milestones and things you have to do fall out. Well, yeah, we want a world where we have this expansive public-private partnership. Well, where are we today? We're not even CMMC, cyber maturity model, level 1 certified. Well, we should probably start there, and get registered and get a cage code and all that kind of stuff. And start bidding on some contracts to build a workflow, all those kinds of things. And then you can start applying, sort of a time horizon, some sort of temporal aspect. And then you at least have the outlines of something that looks and feels like a strategy. And then this is super tactical, but this is something that's helped me a lot is, I don't know if you ever learned the HOPE timeline. Don't ask me what all the letters mean, but basically it was like, you have your plan, right? The thing you want to do. I think the O was operational plan. Within the government and military, it's hierarchical. So you have some higher strategy that you want to nest under. But the most important thing was environmental, right? The E at the bottom. So if you can like draw a line through all those things, this to me is how you can achieve some level of that anticipation we talked about, where it's like, well, 2024 is an election year. Maybe that thing should either come 4 months before so we can lock in whatever thing that we want, or that needs to wait and be in dash lines and we need to reassess and have a decision or whatever post-election to figure out what's changed and what new, we do a SWOT analysis, what new opportunities have presented themselves, what threats have presented themselves. And that's how, you can maybe get out this culture of chaos where everything feels like a surprise and an emergency, because you can at least, to some level predict the plan changes that are going to happen within your environment.
What if I'm like a mid-level leader where I got my team, I'm receiving strategic direction, but my boss is like, hey, you just need to be more strategic, right?
I mean, that's always tough, right? Because there's always the urgency of now, the urgency of your inbox. I think in those cases, especially if your boss is asking you to be more forward-looking, that's great. Like that means they see that potential in you. And one easy way is just to figure out what's making your boss unhappy, what's on their plate. And then if you can make those problems your problems, by doing that, it's going to make you think at least a level of strategic that you weren't before, because you're focused on your piece of pie, and now you'll see how your piece of the pie supports the larger pie. And then once you do that, your boss will probably be very happy and give you more to do. And then you're on the route to becoming that strategic planner that never leaves the basement, because you're always updating some sort of plan.
Yeah. So finding opportunities to get that higher level view, see how the pieces fit together.
Exactly.
What's the discipline required behind strategy and being more strategic?
The education discipline, you mean, or the discipline it takes to stick to a strategy, or both?
Yeah, I mean, both, really.
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, there's reading lists aplenty, and we could probably go book for book from stuff we've read. Defining Victory, like we mentioned, is always a good one. But beyond all the individual books that you can buy to kind of think strategically, looking at case studies and all those kinds of things, I think history is really a good informer of habits that have worked and habits that have failed, right? And it doesn't have to be like grand national history like we've been talking about. It could be like business history. Even your own organizational history is a good place to start. I think it's like undervalued, you know what I mean? And we tend to repeat mistakes because the tagline is America's such a young country, we don't respect history enough yet.
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. So we kind of just fight our way through every battle like it's the first time. But it makes us fast learners, right? But we could probably be faster learners if we went back to history to try to, before we embark on some new strategic crusade, we say, well, what happened with the last crusade? And it can be tough because sometimes if things haven't gone well in the last crusade, no one likes to talk about that history. And you see this in organizations all the time where, there's some institutional knowledge and some bad thing that happened gets buried, but everyone talks about, hey, this thing was a success. So in addition to interrogating the successes, you really learn a lot from interrogating the failures. The discipline, the organizational discipline it takes to stick to strategy, to me, this is the culture. And if you were to break culture down, I think it's really like organizational habits, right? So there's tons to talk about culture. How do you change your culture? And it's behavior you want. So you have to tie it together. What new behaviors does this require? Do you acknowledge those new behaviors? Do you reward those behaviors, or is your reward and talent acquisition model based on some old set of behaviors and values and strategies that you haven't updated? I think personnel policies are the quickest way to incentivize and change a culture, and then to maintain that change. What habits? We wrote this strategy out. When do we actually address this box that we put for third quarter on our milestone? Where do we spend our money? Do we spend our money on this infrastructure we said is key to supporting our strategy, or is it getting spent on whatever else? I remember talking to the CEO of a defense contracting company, and he said he was hated when he came in because they used to have this very expansive coffee service that you could like get for meetings. And he's like, hey, I looked at our budget and it was like $3 or $4 million a year. And I was like, that's this many more engineers, designers, or just a raise I could give you if you just
Wow.
brought your own coffee. But he was hated for it. And he was like, okay, and this is a good adaptive and strategic leader. He's like, if we meet these milestones, I'll bring it back because we'll have enough money then that we can afford this coffee service. I think that's the organizational discipline that you need. And if you were to put that on a personal level, when does a dream become a plan? When you start allocating resources to it. So, if you say, hey, I want to learn how to use AI, but you don't pay for you're just using the free version, not the paid version, so you don't get all the functionality. You're going to be limited. Did you want to take a course? Did you ask your company if they'll pay for a course? Because that's part of their strategy. And then, also updating your own assumptions, holding yourself accountable over time those are the steps. Easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah, it's a real discipline. I want to ask you one last question that's a little bit off topic of strategy, but since you've left the Army, what's one thing you've had to let go of as a leader?
I didn't leave that long ago, but and someone told this to me, right?
I know. How
And
long
you
has it been?
don't a year and some change,
Okay.
so not too long, right? But someone said this. They were like, when you remember, when you leave the Army, you're just some guy. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, of all the faults you may find with the military, going through the service is hard, it's tough on your family, you got to move a lot. It makes you feel very important, right? Like,
Yeah.
some big thing is going on, someone's going to
Yeah.
call you and be like, we need you. And you're like,
Yeah.
yes, you feel like Batman, right? And then, of course, as an officer, you get these little niceties. Someone is going to be like, hey, ma'am, hey, sir, here's your brief, and here's your driver, and here's your car. And of course,
Yeah.
your office is here, and your parking space is there. And it was a little rough when it's like, no, your parking space is behind those train tracks up the hill. You dirty civilian, and you got to walk
Yeah.
here, and you get a different badge than the real people. So I think, no, you have to relinquish some ego a little bit.
Mm,
I think we've seen a lot of times, kind of tie it back to strategy. One of the deaths of strategy is the hippo, highest paid opinion is what drives a strategy. And then it's not realistic, it's sort of capricious. And that's definitely not the case when everyone's someone on equal footing.
yeah.
And you've probably been part of strategy groups where, for whatever reason, everyone's respected, everyone's opinions counts, and everyone has a chance to contribute. Usually delivers a better product. And so while I miss being able to, because sometimes it's frustrating to be like, yes, we get it, but I really want to do this. The process in the end is definitely more sustainable. But it was nice sometimes to be like, no, we're doing this because
Yeah.
I'm a colonel and you're not.
Yeah, that top-down strategy, I will say, is probably one of the most frustrating things that I've experienced, but also just day to day, I see people, right? It wastes so much energy in an organization when you
Yeah,
just try to drive a strategy down and you don't have that buy-in. I mean, that's just like basic change management 101, right? Get that buy-in, get
exactly.
some short-term wins, get people on board. And when you fail to do that, the organization just spins, right? Trying to
Yeah, or they
deal with
resist you or
resist. Yeah.
actively
Yeah.
resist.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like you have to, if you're going to dictate, you got to at least build in some sort of feedback loop, some information sessions, something
Yeah.
where, like you said, there's
Yeah.
there's some corporate level buy-in across your enterprise, or they're just words on the paper that people will look at and then go back to doing things that they're comfortable doing.
Yeah. Just make them angry every time they see him.
Yeah, exactly. When someone's
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you know our strategy, right?" Like, yeah, I don't know. So, I know there was an all hands meeting about it. I don't
Right.
know.
Well, that's probably a great place to end this conversation, Kwame. This has been really great. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you? I know you're not as out there necessarily, plugging away
Yeah.
in an organization trying to make things happen, but if people are interested, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. My name is actually super common. So yeah, look me up, shoot me a message, and I'd love to chat with you all.
Well, I'll make sure your tag is in there. So
Awesome.
awesome. Thank you, Kwame. It's been a great conversation.
Always a pleasure.